no idea how I managed to read 12 books in the month of May, but I did, and I have some thoughts. So let's talk about books. This month I thought it would be fun for me to rank them from least to best, or like least favorite to most favorite. So I'm gonna put them in order and then we'll get started. So I have one book here that I'm not going to be ranking, and that's because it is middle grade and the rest of the genres are young adult and adult, so it doesn't really feel fair comparing them to the rest of the books I read. So that is The Keeper of Lost Cities by Shannon Messenger. I read this entire book aloud to my 6-year-old daughter. She loved it. She gave it 5 stars. I would say this is probably like a 3.75. I honestly still had a really fun time. This is about a girl named Sophie, and I think she's like 12. When she was 5 years old, she hit her head and she was able to start reading everybody's mind. So she had to grow up hearing everybody's thoughts all of the time, and she just kind of had a little bit of a rough upbringing. She had really great parents, but just being able to hear everybody's thoughts all the time and going to school and all of this stuff, it was just really hard for her. And one day she goes on a class field trip and she's just overwhelmed with hundreds and hundreds of people's thoughts. So she goes to a secluded corner to kind of take a breath, and there she meets a young mysterious boy named Fitz. And Fitz came from the land of where the elves live, and he came to retrieve her on a mission and bring her to his world. And that's all I'm gonna say. There is some great found family in here. It is very young adult, middle grade, but it's a lot of fun. The dialogue is great. The character development is great. Like the work in here, the writing, it's very good, though the story is young. So that's why I enjoyed this one, because for being like such a young middle grade book, I was able to really resonate with the characters because of her writing style and the way she grew them. Since I'm studying how to write a book, I'm kind of picking apart authors' writing a little bit more, and she did a very good job of offering the readers a promise at the start of the book, offering progress to get to the payoff. And it was just done very, very well. And I gave it a 3.75, but my 6-year-old daughter gave it a 5 star. So first book was A Keeper of Lost Cities by Shannon Messenger. The next book I have is actually a DNF. So I guess this would be like the bottom, my least favorite of the month. I'm holding up Powerful because I don't have the copy of Fearful. Yeah, it's called Fearful, but I don't own it. Thankfully, I rented it from the library because I just ended up really not caring. It 100% felt like a filler book. It felt like the publisher was like, hey, let's continue making money on this. You gotta write something else. You gotta add another novella in. And it was not necessary. I think I got like 25% of the way through, and it's primarily about one of the characters meeting death. Like I said, with The Keeper of Lost Cities, you have a promise, you have progress, and you have payoff. There was no promise and there was no progress. I don't know. I just didn't really care. So I didn't finish it. And honestly, I wasn't really super invested in the Powerless series to start with. I don't really know why. I feel like it's just a lot of banter and no plot. Yeah, I guess that sums it up. The next book I also did not enjoy, but I did finish. I'm a little bit upset about this one. It's Release Me by Tahara Mafi. Yes, I have a signed special limited edition, first edition. She was one of my favorite authors. I really love the Shatter Me series. It's one of those books where it's like, if I reread that series, would it still be a favorite? I don't know, because my reading taste has changed a lot. But my main gripe with this book is that there was just an excessive amount of swearing, like excessive. And I counted at least 10 instances, at least, of using the Lord's name in vain. And I just was like, it just makes my eyes roll. Something about it takes me out of the story. It feels lazy. It feels kind of trashy a little bit, if I'm gonna be honest. And it just, to me, makes the characters feel immature. Honestly, that was my main gripe with this. And also, characters supposed to be more mature than they were in the original series because they're grown up. This is many years later. They're married, they're having kids, and now we're following the adult version of the kids in the original Shatter Me book. And somehow, their maturity just tanked. Like, you're running an entire republic, like an entire sanction of the world, and you're just so immature. Like that, it just doesn't make sense to me. I'm sorry. So I hate to say I gave this 2.5 stars, and honestly that was generous. I'll give it like a 2 star. And the next book that I read is A Curse for True Love by Stephanie Garber. I ended up giving this one a 3.5 star, but if I'm being completely honest, this whole series is just one of those books where you know you're gonna fly through. You don't really have to think too hard, but it's just not gonna stick with you. At least that was my experience. I feel like my voice is so raspy. I usually don't film this early in the morning. It's like 8 or 9 o'clock, so bear with me. And I think the main reason for that is I just didn't really feel super connected to the main characters because our female main character is not married to the male love interest. So I just like kind of checked out after that. The banter in this whole series was great. There was a lot of yearning. However, it was just a little bit too like, almost like witchy magical for me. It just didn't give me what I wanted it to give. Had I read this series whenever I was just getting back into reading, I probably would have loved it. However, just where I am now and what I prefer. This just wasn't necessarily my favorite. Next, I'm, I think, the most scared to talk about this book just because I feel like it could ruffle some feathers, but I read Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. Now, I did not like this book. There were aspects of it I didn't like, but overall, I liked it. I didn't love it, but I liked it. I ended up giving this one a 3.75 stars, and I wrote a little list of what I liked and disliked about it, so I'm just gonna read it from there because I have so many conflicting thoughts about this book that if I don't like write them out, they're just gonna stay jumbled. So let's start off with what I did like. I wrote, though Angel's character was literally insufferable, I cannot blame her for her actions because she represents us as Christians continually leaving a perfect God for our own ways instead of just remaining with him like we ought, and that was kind of the parallel between Angel and Michael, the two main characters. What I also liked was Michael. Michael Hosea is a godly man through and through, love him. And I also enjoyed the messaging about God's abounding love for us and how we can live like Christ to help those who don't know him yet open up to him and maybe understand him more, and that there's nothing that we can do to separate us from his love. So that's what I did like. Now let's get into what I disliked. I disliked the amount of trauma dumping in order for us to sympathize with the female main character. I know that this is a fiction version of Hosea. However, like, she really went on about some of the descriptions in here that I don't think was necessary. Though it got the point across where there's nowhere that God wouldn't go to save us, it just felt forced because of how much it was. I also didn't really love the simple prose and the fact that the male main character immediately loved her at first sight. I don't know, not my favorite. And it was just overall towing the line of being really close with being a Christian novel to being borderline inappropriate. Yes, I know that she is a, can't say this on YouTube because I'll get demonetized, but she sells herself. And the lengthy descriptions on the subject were not necessary, but they were included anyways. And one of my biggest pet peeves was the fact that Michael went in to the place that she works, paid to see her and talk to her, and then paid to get her out of there. It rubbed me the wrong way that he gave his money to a place like that. And I think the author could have done a more creative job of thinking of a different way to free her from that lifestyle that didn't include a godly man giving his money to a place like that. It just didn't sit right with me. And the majority of this book was just dark and bleak, and the redeeming love part was literally, this is generous, saying it was like this much of redemption and this whole process of being in the dark. And because of that, I just felt a little bit dissatisfied at the end. I needed more happy ever after than just this, because I was just left with all of this. And I did read this fairly quickly. I read this in like a week, maybe 2 weeks. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not gonna give up on Francine Rivers though. I think that it was just this specific book that wasn't for me. I do have A Voice in the Wind on my TBR for this month, and I will be starting that soon. So I'm interested to see how this will compare to that. But yeah, a little bit disappointed by this, but in this book's defense, I did have insanely high hopes because of the immense amount of hype, but a 3.75 star feels good. Next, I have these two books that are practically a tie. If All Else Fails by Emma St. Clair and Just Friends by Haley Pham. I think I might have liked this one just a hair more, so I guess I'll say Just Friends by Haley Pham. I gave this one a 3.75 stars. The story was really sweet, really wholesome. It's about childhood best friends who have crushes on one another and then decide to fall in love, and then they have a falling out whenever they go to college and they don't see each other again until like, I think it's like 4 or 6 years later, and she applies to work at a coffee shop that he just so happens to own and be the manager of. For this being a romance, the one problem that I had with it, I didn't really mind it. It was okay, but I think she relied on their history a little bit more than their chemistry. So I felt a lot of like memories coming back, but not so much of a zing, if that makes any sense. And I think that has a lot to do with the female main character going through a season of grief. Just the timing of her life, meeting him again after losing somebody she loved, brought up a lot of conflicting feelings, so that maybe affected the romance a little bit. I think I would have liked a more healing aspect to the female main character, and then starting to like discover herself in this relationship a little bit more. I think it maybe could have been a little bit longer, honestly. So we could have got some more yearning after these characters have healed on their own from their trauma, instead of like figuring it out together. It just would have felt a little bit more strong had they focused on themselves and then came back together and had those conversations and that yearning and the tension of being like, okay, we had a falling out, but let's come back together. We're both healed. Like maybe we can do this. It was a lot of history and not the most chemistry. But like I said, this was just really sweet. It was really wholesome. I would recommend this as a beach read. It's a nice summery read, easy read. It's got a then and now timeline, so keeps you hooked, keeps you turning the pages. And for a debut novel, I really loved her writing. I will say that. I did not have a problem with her writing. A lot of of people are saying, oh, it's too flowery, oh, she uses too big of words. I don't think so, truly. I enjoyed it and I did not think it was pretentious at all. Not even close. I think a lot of people are thinking that because BookTok books are literally destroying literature. I could go on and on about that, but I enjoyed her writing. I will be reading anything else she writes. I just wanted a little bit more from the romance in terms of chemistry, but I overall thought this was a really sweet read. Next, I was in between if I was going to give this book a 3.75 or a 4-star. So that's why I just said it's like a hair more enjoyable than Just Friends in my opinion. This is If All Else Fails by Emma St. Clair. Again, I think this would be a perfect beach read. It is so entertaining. There is a lot of tension and chemistry because there's so much forced proximity. This follows, I think his name is Wyatt, and then Josie is the female main character, and Wyatt is a injured hockey player during the off season. So he's just in this little sad cabin alone, and his manager, who just so happens to be Josie's older brother, says, Josie, go take care of this man because he's injured and he needs help, and she is a nurse. This is also really funny. It's just really lighthearted. If you want something quick, if you want something easy, if you want something summery, I would totally recommend this. I only have 10 minutes left before I have to leave for church, so the rest of these 5 are going to be done rapid style. Especially since this one was included in a reading vlog of reading Christian fiction for a week, I won't go super in depth with my thoughts for this one because I did already do my review in that video. I was between a 4-star and a 4.25-star rating for this one, but I think I'm gonna settle on a 4-star. This is a Christian fantasy about a girl named Noriel, and there's kind of 2 love interests. I don't really know what direction the book is gonna go in, but we have Calden, who is a warden, and Elias, who is kind of like the warden's worker or whatever. I don't really know what his title is, but she is called to join the wardens after being saved from a tragic accident, and you're kind of just following them on a journey of her discovering her purpose, and I really enjoyed this one. This is a trilogy, but it's not completed yet. The first 2 books are out, but she's working on the 3rd one right now. But if you want to hear more of my thoughts, I will link my vlog of me reading this down below. Next, I'm having trouble like figuring out where I should have placed this book in the lineup, but I have Finlay Donovan Jumps the Gun by El Cosimano. The reason being, I really enjoyed this book. It was very action-packed, very page-turning, very funny, but it's one that I would hesitate to recommend just because of the content. There is closed door spice. However, there are a few like lustful thoughts, and there is some language use. However, it was minimal enough for me to be able to continue and not feel too uncomfortable, but it just like doesn't compare whenever you're talking about like Christian fiction. I just enjoy those more. However, the story of this one was fun and it was a little bit more engaging. I ended up giving this one a 4.25 stars, and I'm not going to say really what this is about because it's the 3rd book in a trilogy, but the original book starts with a girl named Finlay, and she is a thriller writer, and she's meeting with her agent in Panera, and somebody overhears her talking about how to plot her book and thinks that she's a hit woman. So she hires her to take out her husband, and Finlay's like, no, I'm not gonna do that. And somehow she gets accidentally roped into some outlandishly hilarious situations. I like to read these books as palate cleansers. They're super funny. They're very thrilling, but in like a funny, lighthearted kind of way. There's not really any feeling that I've ever gotten quite like reading these books. They have their very own distinct and original feel, but if you are sensitive to language or occasional lustful thoughts, I would not recommend this for you. I guess I will say a little bit about the plot, just vaguely. So this is about 2 accidental criminals who end up going to a police academy retreat to try to find out which one of these police officers is working with the Russian mafia, because they're criminals but for the right cause, but this police officer, whoever the mole is not a good guy. The fact that they are accidental criminals and they're surrounded by cops, her sister is a cop, and there's a love interest who is a cop, and there's also a cop who is a mole. It's just a lot of fun, a lot of things going on in this book, which is why I did enjoy it despite there being some language and some lustful thoughts here and there. So if you're really sensitive to that, I wouldn't recommend this series. However, it was light enough for me to still be able to enjoy it. So number 3, I have Positively Penelope by Pepper Basham. Again, I had read this in my reading Christian fiction vlog, so I'm not gonna go super in depth with my thoughts here. Again, that video is linked below if you want to hear more of my opinions. But this is book 2 in the Skymar series. This is about Penelope. She has it put on her heart to help revive dying theaters and revive the art of theater and acting and community. So she ends up going to Skymar because that is where her sister went and found love, and she's really interested in going there, meeting her sister's fiance or husband. I don't even know if they're married yet, but she gets an internship to go there and build her resume. And we have 2 brothers who own the theater with their grandpa, and both of them are kind of a love interest at first, but it quickly goes to just being like one main love interest. But the female main character is very, very sunshine, very, very filled with joy in the Holy Spirit, and she's just kind of a light everywhere she goes. And it's a story not only about romance, but also about healing as a family. So I really enjoyed this one, and I gave it a 4.25 stars. Number 2, this is really surprising to me because I didn't love the first book in the series. I did enjoy enjoy it. But book 2 just had me feeling like those almost 5-star feelings. Like I was like feeling little jitters while I was reading it, and that is the second volume in the Emma M. Lyons series. My friend Lyndsey bought this for me for my birthday. Thank you, Lyndsey. She actually just started a channel, so I will link her channel down below. You guys should totally check her out. I actually read the first book because of her whenever we did our book swap over Christmas, and she sent me this one for my birthday, and honestly, it was the perfect time because I was just really in the mood for something short and light and easy. And funny enough, I read the first book in March, and those journal entries take place during March, and then I just randomly decided to read this book in May, and it starts in May. So I just so happened to read these books exactly whenever the journal entries were taking place, which was honestly really fun. But this is a very clean, quirky Regency romance where we're following Emma in the form of her journal entries, and she's kind of writing about everybody that she's encountering and like the experiences she's having day to day. But it's written in a way where you don't feel like you are outside of her life. Since they are journal entries, they feel personal and they feel like you are going through her life with her. So the author did a really, really great job of writing this book in the form of entries, but making you feel like you're along for the journey instead of looking at it like secondhand. And I believe this is like her cousin she lives with. I could be wrong on that, but she lives with somebody who's supposed to be in charge of her money and kind of gambled it all away. And now she's kind of stuck at this house until she turns of age to inherit her things. And so to get more money, she has a tenant living in one of the empty rooms right across from her. So like they share a wall, and her bedroom's here and his bedroom's here. And I honestly love him. I have no idea who the love interest could be. There could be like 4 different guys, honestly, who could be potential love interests, but there's not really a romance yet. It's just kind of crumbs here and there of her meeting people, kind of having a little banter. She's just one of those characters that is so witty that she has chemistry with everybody, and it makes for a really entertaining read. So this was my second favorite book that I read of the 12 books. I really, really enjoyed this, and now I just need to buy the whole series and read the whole series because I'm invested after finishing this one. And my favorite book that I read this month was The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. I ended up giving this a 4.25 stars, but after thinking about it, I'm bumping it up to a 4.5. The only reason why it wasn't a 5 stars is because sometimes I was just a little bit bored, and I feel like we could have just pulled some quotes from here and been like, yeah, that's really good, and get out what you would have gotten from reading the book, if that makes sense. But again, I included this in my Christian fiction reading vlog, so go watch that video if you haven't already. You will see all of my thoughts on these books. But for those quotes being so good, I was like, yeah, I just have to give this a 4.5 star, even though it's not necessarily a read that's going to be super entertaining or super page turning. At times it can feel a little bit dark because you're reading it from the point of view of a demon who's coaching a newer demon on how to manipulate Christians and try to keep them in bondage with lies and just like all of those ugly tactics that the enemy uses. But it's honestly very informative also, and it kind of helps you to realize how deep this spiritual war is and how cutthroat Satan is on trying to attack people who are saved and get them to revert to their old ways. So just like reading that is just a really, really good reminder to always stay on guard. I did really enjoy how he kind of wrote these demons to know that they're going to lose, and there are certain parameters that they can operate in, and there are certain parameters that they cannot operate in because they don't have the control. So it's not like they were seeming to be victorious. Like they know the boundaries that they have set are because God set them, and there's some things that they just cannot do because their power is nothing in comparison to his power. So I really, really liked how this was written. I think he did a great job of portraying all of those truths, but being told from the point of view of somebody dark and demonic. It was a really, really interesting and informative read while still being like fun and speculative. So those were the 12 books I read in this month. Let's do a little recap. Keeper of Lost Cities by Shannon Messenger. I gave it 3.75 star. Fearful by Lauren Roberts and a DNF. Next was Release Me by Tahara Mafi, and I gave it 2 stars. Then I read A Curse for True Love by Stephanie Garber and gave it a 3.5 stars. Next I read Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers and gave it a 3.75 stars. Next I read Just Friends by Haley Pham and gave it a 3.75 stars. Next I read If All Else Fails by Emma St. Clair and gave it a 3.75, maybe 4 star. Next I read These Hallowed Binds by A.M. Dalen and I gave it 4 stars. Next I read Finley Donovan Jumps the Gun by El Cosimano. Next I read Positively Penelope by Pepper Basham and gave it a 4.25 stars. Next I read the second installment in the Emma M. Lyons series and gave it a 4.25 stars. And my favorite book from the month was C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters, and I gave it a 4.5 stars. So that is all for my May wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I pray you have a blessed day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!